Hi there, I'm excited to be here today to talk about Habanero's COVID employee experience research study. But before I get into sharing some of the results of that, I wanted to give a bit of context. Habanero as an organization exists to help other organizations do a better job of creating great career experiences for people. We want to help organizations be places where people's careers can flourish, people can live fulfilling professional lives and lead better lives overall. And so our way of doing that, our way of helping organizations is through helping them within the employee experience. It's our ability to go in and help them identify the dehumanizing experiences that hold people back, and also identifying the wonderful experiences that really help people and magnifying the wonderful ones and eradicating the dehumanizing ones. So that's what we do. So when COVID hit and the lockout happened and people were sent home, the lockdown rather, this was one of those moments where purpose meets circumstance. And what we were seeing, talking to our clients and people in the world of work, we were seeing that people, by and large, were rattled, quite rattled, and they're finding the circumstances quite difficult. And we were also seeing that organizations were struggling to really know what was going on for people at a personal level, like deep down at a personal level. They were using surveys and things like that to find out some higher level information, but they were really missing their true story at an empathetic level. We're also finding that the tools that organizations had used in the past weren't suitable for this current point in time. We'll talk more about that. And then finally, of course, we were seeing quite early on that this is the beginning of a big movement in the world of work. And we were really interested in how this would play out and how it was going to affect employees' relationships with their professions and their employers. So thinking about this and stepping back a little bit, we asked ourselves, what can we do to help the world right now? And one of the things we came up with was this study that we're going to talk about today. And the whole idea was to get more of a high resolution look at what was going on for people at a human level. And so we wanted to lean on our empathetic research capabilities to really get down to that detail at an empathetic level. We wanted to move quickly. We knew that's quite a dynamic world, and we do a lot of this type of research, but generally spans a longer period of time. So for this research, we got it down to a 4 to 5 week process in and out of an organization, and allowed us to surface actionable insights that people could use. So that was very important. But not just the quick hits and quick wins. We wanted actually to find out the bigger ideas that organizations could use to design their future. And we wanted to be able to pull those ideas out across different organizations, create a bit of a community around the participants so they could share information about what was going on in each of their organizations, because we knew that was a rich learning opportunity. And we wanted to draw those bigger conclusions out of it. So here we are, we're at this conference together, employee experience professionals. And one of the things I've learned is that the conversations we've been having to date are at a higher level in organizations. We would be talking to CHROs in the past. Now we're talking to CEOs, CHROs, and other operations leads in the organization. This idea of employee experience has become much more strategic. And so what I wanted to put out into the crowd in our conversation is a conversation about how can we as employee experience leaders elevate this in the organization and make it a topic within the strategy conversation that happens overall. Mallory O'Connor, one of my colleagues, was the host last year, and she met some wonderful people with some great skills and capabilities. But she said one of the themes where people felt they weren't supported enough and their work didn't have enough profile in the organization. I think that has to change now. So my ask to everyone here is that they find a way to step up in their organization and elevate this conversation to a higher level. So the breadth of research is massive. We talked to people in 49 countries. We've gone into a combined cumulative employee base of over 84,000 people. So the findings are quite rich and broad. But what I've done is I've pulled out 3 themes that I think are really important for this crowd. And they are, 1 is that we can't go back to the way we were as organizations. That world is gone. 2 is that the state we're in right now is not sustainable, and we need to actually find a way to evolve forward from where we're at. And number 3, speaking of evolving forward, we've learned enough in this last little while that's given us new opportunities to use different tools and think differently about how we will evolve forward. So let's get into this a bit. So first of all, I talked about not being able to go back to where we were before. And one of the key elements of that is the experience people have had as they moved and worked from home, or even in changed situations where there are environments where they haven't been able to go home. Their supervisors and their people leaders, they've had to change the way they've shown up. And what we found is that people by and large have been less micromanaged and less supervised in this current environment. And what the response to that is people have felt more trust from the organization, and they've actually given more trust in response. And even more significantly, they felt a deeper sense of meaning in the work that they've been doing. So if you think about that, where we are right now, that's an amazing gain. Organizations work really hard to actually build a sense of meaning in their work. And the circumstances of what's been happening right now has actually provided that for us. We can't go back on that. We can't try and put that genie back in the bottle. As leaders, as employee experience leaders, we need to help the leaders in our organization understand that they need to show up differently for their people and develop a different relationship with them and allow people to continue to work with that autonomy. A lot's been said about working from home, and there's a lot written about how happy people are from working from home, but what we found is that there's good aspects and bad aspects, but what we found universally, and there's a lot of other research, proper research that supports this, is that people now have a different expectation of the balance between work from home and work from the office. And so going forward, organizations just need to think about and design and be thoughtful about a hybrid option that meets people's changed expectations, because it's not going to work to send everyone to the office 100% of the time. And it's not going to work in the future to have everyone home 100% of the time. We need to find a way to leverage the strengths of both those things and be thoughtful about designing a hybrid experience for people. Another dimension of this that's turned out to be very important is how people have had to adapt their personal lives to make things work in the last little while. And what's come out of that is people have learned a lot about what works for them at a personal level, what works for their family and their loved ones. And this level of work-life integration, where there was exceptions made in work to allow for that from time to time, it has to become the norm, because people have built their lives around this new situation, in this new environment, this new context for them and their family and the people around them and their community. So going forward, the opportunity is to be thoughtful about designing that in, not as the exception to how we work, but as a thoughtful element of creating a great employee experience. So we've talked about why we can't go back to where we were. I want to talk now about why we can't stay where we are right now. And so one of the big things is how variable productivity is. There's a lot to be said about being at home and being focused, and that works great for certain types of tasks. But not all work that everyone's doing, our research shows, is very effective. So we have high variability in productivity, some tasks that are very hard to get done in the current environment, and some tasks that work really well. And we've talked about the implications of that with respect to a hybrid office environment. Further work has to be done by organizations to think carefully about and design not just the tools that we roll out to people, but the culture that supports that and the capabilities people have around the tools, and developing new norms and behaviors to make the best of those tools working remote, and to be able to transition in and out of being in the office and being together and being remote and working separately. One other absolutely critical element of this is where people are at from an emotional point of view. And people are really on thin ice still and in quite a fragile state. And so what we found is that there's high volatility in people's response to things like risk and growth orientation. And so what that tells us is that people are somewhat overextended and from an emotional and an energy point of view. We know that people are working more hours. We know that people are making lots of other personal sacrifices, and they're dealing with a lot of other unsettling elements in the rest of their life, obviously. So we can't look at what's going on right now in the current productivity and say, awesome, we're working at this great level, we can just chart that going forward. Organizations need to think about where people are at. And we like this notion of surge capacity. So right now, people are at the edge of their surge capacity in a lot of situations. They're going as hard as they can. They're right at the end of their emotional tether. So there has to be some work and some design work done to allow people to find a sustainable, happy place for them to be productive, but be happy and well adjusted. So that this idea of people being fragile is a very important part of our study, very important finding. And culture is another really interesting topic. Culture, by definition, is slow moving. Culture in an organization tends to be quite fixed and make small changes over time because it's based on these deeply held beliefs that everyone shares in the backs of our minds in an organization. So those are actually hard to change over time. However, we've been in a really interesting period with massive tectonic forces acting on our organizations. It's not just COVID, it's Black Lives Matter and racial justice. It's massive industry transformation and industry disruption. It's organizations having to force their way through really significant business model changes. And so all these forces are actually creating a more dynamic environment for culture than normally exists. The problem is it's not intentional cultural change. And some of it's working out in a favorable way, adapting to the environment, some of it's not. So what has to happen in the future is organizations need to be more intentional with their culture going forward, which means understanding more about how it's shifted in the past little while. I think we're also in a really interesting opportunity zone right now, because what we found through our research is that organizations have become more empathetic. So we're more connected with each other, and leaders have been listening more to people. And here's a great opportunity to leverage that to co-create the future culture of our organization by working with the organization cohesively rather than having it be a top-down change. And I wanted to bring up something I think is really important. It's a broader context to this whole thing. And if you think back 70 years to industry, particularly going back to the 50s, the forces of competitive advantage came from things like real estate holdings and how big my plant was, and owning supply chain, and perhaps the number of patents I owned and my financial reserves. And those competitive advantages have created moats around industries, around organizations that fended off other challengers. But what's happened over time is competition has shifted from being focused on the people with the most assets wins to organizations that can create an environment where they can attract the best people and put them in an environment where they can work individually and even more importantly as teams to do their very best work, solve big problems. And so we see that, for example, in technology and these really competitive industries, but that trend is increasing in all industries. So we refer to that as the humanization of industry. So that's been happening for the last 70 years. But we're at a really interesting time right now with COVID. And what we've measured, what our research shows, is that rate of change has actually increased in the last little while. And I can't say for sure if this is going to continue forever, but I do think it's an opportunity for us to go into our organizations and talk to our peers or the other leaders in our organization and let them know that this isn't sort of a transient thing that's happening with COVID. This isn't sort of an aberration. This is actually part of a bigger trend. It's just accelerated the process. So it's here to stay. Okay, we've talked about why we can't go back. We've talked about why we can't stay here. There's so many important learnings about what works, and we can put those learnings into how to evolve our organization the next little while, and I want to talk quickly about that. One of the key things is we do our research in a way that we try and beat out the biases that we have, and we try not to go in with a bunch of hypotheses to prove or disprove them. We want the stories and the experiences of people to surface, and we'll pull the themes out of that. So a theme that came out loud and clear was leadership. And we found that by and large, actually, the organizations who were in the study, who were great employers, their leaders did a very good job, and people were quite happy with the decisions they made. Not universally, and there's some horror stories about when it goes wrong. But what we found is that people's sensitivity to great leadership and poor leadership is very high right now, and it has a dramatic impact on the employee experience. And not surprisingly, empathy plays a key role in the experience people have with it. When leaders can show up and understand what's going on and talk to people at a human level and be vulnerable, that's made a big difference for people. And when leaders show up and they're tone deaf and they're not really able to put themselves in the shoes of the people they're talking to, it's been quite catastrophic for people and quite damaging for their relationship. So this idea of empathy showing up in the leadership realm, we've talked about it for a long time. Well, it's absolutely core to what leadership is right now. We have to rethink about the role empathy plays in leadership. Another big thing is that's really important and really fascinating is seeing how organizations have had to be adaptive and experiment and try things. And so one of the participants, they had a 10-year digital transformation strategy, and they had to roll out the bulk of it in a month. So they had to experiment, they had to try things, they had to be okay with failure, and they had to have everyone in on it, learning and sensing and responding. And so this is an example of an organization learning how to be agile. And I'm not talking capital A agile development process. I'm talking about agile behaviors, adopting agile behaviors. And we see this as a critical opportunity for organizations going forward to observe how they've worked in this last period of time and understand what are the elements of being agile that we want to keep and help flourish in the organization going forward, because it's going to make our organization more adaptable and more resilient. A third element that's I'm very passionate about is what we do as professionals to really understand what's going on with the people in our organization. And I'm here to say that surveys aren't going to provide us the entire picture, and What I'm not trying to say is surveys aren't important. They're very important to us and our organization, and they will continue to be important. But there's so much more we need to understand about what's going on with people that we can't get from a survey. So we really advocate for more of a mixed method approach to research and listening. And what I mean by that is combining quantitative tools like surveys with qualitative tools like empathetic research and listening labs, and these tools that allow people that first of all are designed for discovery, and they're not testing a hypothesis or validating a concept, and they're focused on creating a bubble of psychological safety around people, and then helping give them the language to express what's going on with them, and then pulling those themes out. So it's the combination of these two research techniques that really provides the rich, high-resolution picture of what's going on. And there's a lot more to be said about that, but I really think this is a critical element of the whole story of all our learning. So here we are. I feel this is a really important time for employee experience professionals to play a leadership role in their organization. I mentioned before how this is a much higher profile, but this is our chance to really educate the rest of our team about what the employee experience is. And it's not just the journey, it's not just hiring and onboarding, it's really how people are coping and reacting, and we can help a lot of other leaders in our organization make a really strong connection between the employee experience and their ability to be successful in their roles. And I think a lot about the risk of us returning back to the office and people snapping back into the old physical environment and having that show up as people returning or backsliding, I would say, into old behaviors that aren't as constructive. And so I think that's where our job really shows up, and to create future environments where our organizations are really strong and really robust, fueled by great employee experiences. We need to be the ones that show up with this vision of how it could be, and helping your organization evolve and not snap back or not fall back into the world it was in. And the goal of all this is to create organizations that are built to succeed in the future, because they're built actually to create great environments for the people within them.